to the No Grow Go podcast. I'm Matt Jordan. I'm the senior pastor here at First Methodist Church. And today we have a very special guest with us, Mr. Clayton Lassiter, who is senior pastor, the pastor of Headland Methodist Church in Headland, Alabama. And Headland is well known for both Ravenwood Sport and Clays and their coffee roasting, which we have the Southern Pecan flavor with us today, so it's very delicious. But I'm going to allow Clayton to share a little bit about his church, about him, his ministry, his family, and introduce himself. So Clayton, tell us a little bit about you, man.
Yeah, so I grew up in Panama City, Florida, but I've lived kind of everywhere. My journey in God and general is a longer show than you probably have time for today. But I think I was also a military service veteran. I'm United States Marine Corps veteran, and so I think that life prepared me for what the life was going to be like in the Methodist Church, where you just move every 3 years because someone told you to.
Sure.
And I'm a graduate of Indiana Wesleyan University. Yes, we do have a football team. Go Wildcats!
You do, yeah.
Yes,
you do have a football team.
NAIA. Mm-hmm. And then I also got my master's of pastoral ministry from there before going on and getting my required schoolwork done with Asbury Theological. So I just graduated with my second master's degree, and I am the pastor at Headland Methodist Church. I've been there since 2023. I guess it was like July.
Yeah, right.
Because we were hired almost like simultaneous.
Close to the same time, yeah.
Almost same. And so God has been doing some incredible things. I've been married to my wife. He's done incredible things in my life. I got to marry my wife, Bobby, back in 2006. We're almost the 20-year mark next year. So, wow. Yeah. And for that, we're going to go to Africa.
Nice.
Yeah.
On vacation or on mission?
Neither. Oh. We were both elected as delegates in the Global Methodist Church. And so we'll both be going to Africa to represent the Alabama Emerald Coast Conference. And so
great.
And I was like, well, baby, you said I'd never take you.
yeah, that's right. That's right.
But we're excited about that opportunity. But yeah, we've been married for 20 years. We have a 16-year-old daughter named Addison. We have a 14-year-old named Riley Jean. And then my 11-year-old son, he's about to turn 12. And his name is Cal. Because if I tell everybody Cal and they see his name on paper, they immediately cannot answer his name. And so I'm excited to be here. I am a fan of your show. I do watch it every now and then, when it pops up in my feed. And so, it's been going good. Like I love my church. We are a growing church, for sure. And we were talking about that downstairs. Like we're in that in-between phase, not quite a large church, but not quite a small church either. And so, and a church that has a kind of a changing identity. We have a culture shift going on right now because we are seeing a lot of new young families.
Right.
And I was telling you downstairs, like we are currently kind of in like capture the data mode. Like what is it that we're doing right, whether by purpose or by accident? And what should we be focused on? And so like, what does the data tell us? And then also, how can we just be faithful and sustain that and keep doing what God has called us to do? And, because I do get those questions from time to time, like, how are y'all doing this?
Yeah.
And I just go, preach, teach, go to the beach.
Yeah. There you go.
So
we could cheers to that. That's for sure. Preach, teach, and go to the beach. And so I've been to Headland a couple of times. I've been there for a Lenten luncheon for you. And for your predecessor, I got to speak at a Lenten dinner, I think anyways, that's not important.
Or breakfast.
Yeah, one of the two. But I've been to your church a couple of times.
Yeah.
And we actually have some members of our church who are related to some members of your church.
Yes.
So I always hear about the good things that you're doing at Headland. And I'll be honest with you, Headland is such a pretty town to me. Mm-hmm. I mean, just such a pretty town. When it comes to Headland and your journey, it's similar to ours. As far as disaffiliation goes.
Yeah.
Not always a pretty topic, not always a beautiful decision, not always a beautiful process. But I think both of our churches would agree that finding ourselves on the other side of this journey, no matter how tense, has been worth it to see what Christ has done. And so when we consider what goes on past disaffiliation, our church decided that we're going to remain independent, and we've continued that position just to really, a time of evaluation and a time too of hey, let's not rock the boat. We can still be in connection with other churches. One of the things we do on our podcast is try to get ministers from the community and other places to talk about things that are similar across denominational lines and things that we can discuss and whatnot. But there was a denomination that was sort of birthed. I would say probably birthed out of Asbury, but it was definitely birthed out of a conservative Wesleyan movement that started out as a small group, the Wesleyan Covenant Association, and then became what we know now as the Global Methodist Church. And there are some things going on in the Global Methodist Church I think a lot of people are excited about, and things that a lot of people have a lot of questions of. And I think for churches like First Methodist and others who spend a diligent amount of time studying and talking about what kind of affiliation are we looking for? What do we do in this? How do we do this? There may have been a lot of time of discussion and learning, but some of that may have ceased for some, and some of that may have been, hey, this is where we are. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is give us an update on the Global Methodist Church now. 3 years, right? 3 years?
Yeah, it's kind of confusing because, we had that very first annual conference right away. And, so it is kind of confusing when you think about it. Because there was that first one right there in August of 23.
That's right.
And then now the last two have been in May, and they've been in different spots. So we've been at St. James, we've been Cross Point down in Niceville, and now this last one was back at St. James. Next year, you don't have to go anywhere if you want to come visit the annual conference. For us, it'll be here in Dothan at Covenant Methodist. And so Kyle, I don't know if Kyle knows what he's getting into yet, but we'll see. Love you, man.
Yeah.
But man, there are so many great things happening across the denomination, not just what's happening here in the Alabama Emerald Coast Conference. I think it is important, that we understand that we are not just this is not just our little circle here in the southeast corner, and this is where we play. It is a global denomination, and it is growing faster, of course, in other parts. Although, I like to track numbers, and I was looking at the numbers, and initially I think there was like around 130 churches initially affiliated with. Now we're right at 168. And we kind of think the projection will be right about 200 churches over the next 5 years.
Okay.
And so
in the Alabama Emerald Coast.
In the Alabama Emerald Coast area.
Okay.
And so it's kind of like where everything is tracking, and we are focused less on what we left behind and more about what we're looking at in our present and our future. We acknowledge our past, but it's becoming a place where we're talking less and less about the past and more about the present and what we're trying to do in the future. And the future is we are trying to be disciples who make disciples, and we want to live into scriptural holiness, which means kind of reteaching people what it even means to be in scriptural holiness. Because when you say those words to churches, who for the last year, last 40 years have only heard about grace and connectionalism and, being a big tent and things like that, what got lost is what gave Methodism its distinction is not even social holiness, the focus on entire sanctification.
Yeah.
And so for us as Global Methodists, that's what we are focused on in reteaching our churches. And we're seeing churches not just like Headland. And I don't know what y'all are experiencing here personally, at Enterprise. We didn't get enough time to walk across the street, between here and there.
Sure.
But there, I'm looking at other churches and studying their data and just kind of saying like, hey, what is this message of scriptural holiness doing for them? And for us, it is exciting. Like, conference is no longer a dread. I mean, there's still parts that we all kind of are like, I can take a break, but we are excited about what God is doing because we're seeing transformation. We're seeing churches that were once dead, now alive. We're seeing, just the oppression of, like the institutions. Like, this is not an institution that is going to weigh down on you. They're just really not, and that's not because our leadership isn't involved. It is a prayer for choice that like, hey, we're not going to micromanage the churches.
Sure.
Like nobody from the conference or no bishop is calling me and saying, hey, I noticed this. Nobody's telling us, we're not having meetings that could be emails. We're not having random district gatherings. We're trying to be really intentional about it. And and to cultivate real connection and not, hey, we're here because we have to be here.
Sure.
It's more of a culture now that we want to be here.
That's cool.
And it was weird at first because, you're feeling everything out and you're kind of like, I don't know what to make of this yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I even kind of said that about a year ago with some, like we're still discovering what it means. And of course we had the first convening conference in Costa Rica.
Right.
And it was powerful to witness that history, man. I'll just be honest. Like, being down there with, not as part of a delegation, but just as I was representing my seminary.
Right.
Just being in the room and just seeing that, like, even people who disagreed with each other about certain things that they wanted to see in the discipline, there was no protest. Nobody was protesting. I mean, I had a guy say that this is the first time in 40 years that he went to a general conference and there wasn't a protest.
Really?
And then there was an outpouring moment where people, I went past time in worship one time where the outpouring was there.
Awesome.
Just the presence of God, and people just could sense that something was different about this being it was the most worship filled general conference that I've ever witnessed. And granted, I'm young.
Sure.
And I've only witnessed a few.
Sure.
But this was different.
That's awesome.
And, I think that this new movement at the Global Methodist Church is going to have to work hard to avoid the pitfalls of the past. It's going to have to work really hard to not go to a default mode.
Yeah.
Because if you have the same people leading the same things and the same ideas, but I kind of see, and I'm going to call out his name. His name is Hunter Bethea.
Mm-hmm.
You know Hunter?
I know Hunter.
Yeah. I love him.
I know Hunter.
Love me some Hunter.
I like Hunter a lot.
Hunter was on my podcast, and man, I could just hear his passion for the Global Methodist Church, and and I'll just say, like, hey, we need our young leaders, that we need them to lead, and we need our leaders to hear us and say, hey, you're right, like it's time for this young generation, whether they're Gen X, Gen Z, Gen Millennial, or whatever generation's coming up.
Yeah.
Gen Alpha. I can't keep up with all them all.
I can't either. Yeah. And we do need them to lead, and I think that goes across just the church in general. We need this younger generation to lead. And I had gone to a conference, and it's kind of taboo to probably say this now, but Orange Conference, and Reggie Joyner and Kristen.
I don't know why it's taboo. So
yeah, well, they had an affair, and it's exposed a lot of different things within ministry, and also there's a lot of things going on with that. But anyways, I got on this conference a couple of years ago before all that came out, and they they provide some great resources for ministry and other things. But one of the things that I love is their partnership with Fuller Theological Seminary. Mm-hmm. And Fuller, they have some great resources that come out through research and research-based information before they produce material, it should be good best practice for everybody. But one thing they did was a book called Growing Young, and they just looked at a whole bunch of churches. Brad Good's church in Santa Rosa was one, and some others that churches that are growing young, that have a high amount of young people, young families, young students, as far as young adults, that kind of thing. And what they found is that students, young people, those in their 20s to 40s probably, that were leading and serving in the life of the church and had responsibilities of leading in the church, caused the church to grow young and had a high impact on their life.
Yeah.
And something he said in there has stuck with me ever since. And he said, our young people are not the future of the church. They are the church today.
That's right.
And I think it's so impactful of a way that both denominationally, churches like ours that's independent, like Asbury Church in Huntsville and Cove Church and a series of others, we find ourselves in a position where we're something new and fresh, whether it be new and fresh in the global or in a network or independence or whatever it may be. I think that new and freshness opens up the door to say, look, we need our young people to lead.
Yeah.
And we need to give them opportunities to lead well. Which means training and all sorts of things. And I'm glad to hear that in the global that there are meetings that are emails that should be emails.
Yeah.
And that there is holiness. And matter of fact, Matt O'Reilly was a co-officiant for one of my best friend's weddings. And he actually just wrote a book on
Free to be holy.
Free to be holy, right? In the Wesleyan tradition or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Matt's a good Asbury grad and someone that have a lot of respect for theologically and his writings, and I think that is something that people have forgotten. And I shared this with my church a while back about holiness and what role it has in the life of the Methodist Church. That Wesley's concern was never that the people called Methodists would cease to exist,
right?
That they would be a dead sect,
right.
That we would lose that.
We'd have the form of religion, but without the power.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so I think that is something that people have forgotten, and in a way we forget where we're going because we're so caught up in where we've been. Instead of going forward to say, "Let's a new day is fresh. Let's go forward. Let's not worry about those things. Let's move." And so I think that's really cool. What is one thing in the Global Methodist Church that's going on that you wish everybody would know? Whether they're global, not global, discerning, not discerning, just if you want to know the truth about the Global Methodist Church, here's what you need to know that no one's telling you.
That's a really great question, a big question. And I would say that I think we need to let people know is like, if you're looking for that, the church, not the church that you grew up in, but you're looking for a church that is grace-filled, Bible-believing, that is what the Global Methodist Church is. We are a grace-filled people. We believe in the Bible, and we are orthodox in our traditions. Whether it doesn't matter if it's contemporary worship or traditional worship. That's who we are. And it's a welcoming place. It's a place where, and not necessarily, but we do hold each other accountable. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the difference right now between us and where we were. And I would also say that, we are starting out as a new denomination and adding the things that we need and we feel like God has called us to do. One of those things would be such as our emergency relief, ministries, disaster relief. Right. This conference has already really stepped up, and Ron Toole, that's my Ron Toole plug. Yes, he's already stepped up and organized. When we were disorganized. Because just because you're standing up as a new denomination doesn't mean the storms are going to stop coming.
That's right. That's right.
So we've already really started a tremendous push in that arena, again, to be one of those organizations that the community and whether it's in the United States or elsewhere, can count on to go and help in disaster relief ministries. And I think you're going to see an increase in that. I think also we are strategically looking at, how to really be disciples. So we want to make sure, like, that's the big initiative right now. The other initiative is that our clergy do not stand alone. Like, you have to be in a small group, that you yourself, not leading a small group, but in a small group, a band, where whether it's a brotherhood or a sisterhood or a co-ed, whatever, but there's that getting back to the Wesleyan traditions of, being in a class system and a Methodist band.
So do y'all use Seedbed for that? They have an app that you can use.
I think that we've offered a little bit of both and. Okay. So I think there is a digital thing that you can do, but it's really just like, first and foremost, be in a group and have accountability. Have somebody that you can talk to when you're going through things and praying with on a regular basis about the state of your soul, and get in one. Because if you're not in one, you can't remain not in one.
Wow.
And right now we're not talking about anything like punishment wise, but we are saying things like, you've got to be in one, and so I think eventually down the road, we'll see like, hey, if you're not in one, you're going to be in one that you don't want to be in. And I don't think we want that,
Yeah, that's something that Seedbed does really well. They're a resource out of Asbury. We use Seedbed for a variety of things at our church. And I read the Wake Up Call every day. And one of the things that I love about Seedbed is they do have an app for the bands. And you can sign up for a band, and the app just gives you the questions. Yeah. And you can organize your group as a on their records as a band that meets, and it goes over a statement of privacy and all those sorts of things and all the rules of a band. But if you are looking for a band and you don't have a band, there is a way to get connected in that community through the app, which is cool. That's why I didn't know if that was something. I mean, Seedbed is not directly supported or in correlation with the global outside of it being connected to Asbury and things, but I didn't know if that was something y'all used, especially with Matt O'Reilly and Jessica LeGrone and so many others that are proponents of that. But that's awesome. I mean, that's awesome, and I can tell you, Pete Scazzaro is a hero of mine. So is Rich Villados, and Pete actually came and spoke at our graduation at Asbury.
Really?
My year, yeah, it's awesome. But anyways, I've had a chance to do a lot of reading on both of them, and Villadals in the Deeply Formed Life talks about the practice of Sabbath, and he was getting ready. He just got hired, hadn't been hired for 6 months, 2 years, maybe somewhere in that range at New Life Fellowship in Queens.
Oh, and I know him real well.
Oh yeah, good. Well, Scazzero was still a senior pastor there, and he said something that I just could not ever imagine in a church. He said the church was growing, my part of the ministry was doing well, things were thriving, and Pete calls me in his office and says that I've got 2 weeks or I'm fired, and he said for what? And he said because you're not practicing Sabbath.
Yeah,
and he said we told you this was a requirement.
Yeah,
that you have to practice Sabbath. If you are not whole in Christ, you have nothing to give to others. And
that's right.
And I think that's so important for a denomination and especially for local churches to hold spiritual disciplines, wholeness in Christ, and those things at high regard, to the point that we say we believe in this so much that there is a consequence if you don't do this, because the consequence is even greater if you go a lifetime without doing it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really, really crucial. And so I'm glad to hear that the Global's doing that. Now, as far as a young pastor goes, there's a lot of things that you learn in ministry, do's and don'ts. I think I may have learned more don'ts than do's at times. One time I was in student ministry, and that was when like color wars was a big thing, And, and I had a great idea to save money, and instead of buying already made like color bombs for like a dodgeball type of thing, I took pantyhose and flour and food dye and colored it all up, and I tested it on the wall of our church gym on the exterior wall, and I hit it, and there was a giant like pink spot that was there, and when we tried to paint it off, it stained the wall. There's still an off-colored cream spot on that wall.
Okay.
And I quickly learned, like I was told, like this better not leave the rec field. Like this has got to stay out there.
Yeah.
And so there are a few things like that I learned, like, all right, maybe not test things against church property, and like that probably wouldn't be good.
That's a pretty good.
Yeah. And I've learned some other things too, both positive and negative. But what are some things, tongue in cheek or serious, whichever you want to share, that were some lessons you've learned as a young pastor that you think are valuable, both for any believer in Jesus and someone in ministry leadership that you've learned positively, negatively, funny, serious, whatever, or all the above? Hey,
I'm thinking of a lot of stories actually.
You're a guest, and we've got full coffee cups. So
yeah. So for me, it is better to ask a question than to get in trouble.
Yeah.
I'd rather you come and ask me, and I tell every one of my staff that I've ever come just ask. I'd rather you ask than assume. And, because I'm a big believer in the 7 Ps. Anybody that's in the military community already knew what I meant. And I'll give you the Christianese version of that is, prior proper planning prevents pathetic poor performance.
Mm-hmm.
And, to me, for anything that we're going to do, whether it's taking a youth trip or anything, it just prevents bad things from happening. But the funniest thing is, one time
at church,
at youth camp, that's how this story starts, is, they had said, hey, you cannot drive the youth van up to the cabin on, I forget what, it was Camp Lee. It's over in Anniston, kind of that area.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there's some serious hills over in that area. I mean, it's called the Red Hills and Red Mountain, Stone Armories over there. And this lake,
that's where I grew up,
is like this. And so it climbs. And so the cabin was like one of the furthest ones up. And so I was like, yeah, I'm not walking all of the kids' gear up the mountain. And nobody's told us that there was a gator available. ATV.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody. So I drive the church van up there.
Which you weren't supposed to do.
Oh, we made it.
Yeah.
And then we got stuck under the roof of the actual cabin.
Nice.
And I am so thankful because we had a great senior pastor, and I called him. I was like, I'm letting you know it's stuck under the roof, like all that good stuff. He goes like, well, can you get it out? And I was like, yeah, it's just going to damage the roof because nobody's looking at the roof, Clay. He's like, ain't nobody going to climb up and look at the roof. So I have, which is probably true because they traded that thing in like about 7 or 8 months later. And I'm like, they got the full value for that thing. All right.
Yeah.
Good for you.
That's awesome.
Shouldn't have.
Yeah.
Because there was definitely about a 4 or 5 foot scrape on that. And one of my youth boys was just sitting there in the front seat going, this is great. Yeah. And it had no backup camera. Like there was no place to turn and maneuver this 50 because either we were about to go down a hill. So I had one boy outside, like, doing this number, like cut the wheel, like another youth boy over here, like me trying to like cut around this building. It was either we were about to go down a hill.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I'm about to die. I was like, I do not want to die on this hill.
Yeah.
So if they tell you not to go up a hill with your church van, it is not a suggestion.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
But other things are, don't ever undervalue, and as more of in the senior pastor value, don't undervalue your presence in the life of people.
Yeah. Amen.
And I see this more and it is in the younger pastors. They don't like to do things like visitation as much, but I tell you, it's so important for relationship building and, getting to know people and getting to know your community. And it is hard. Yeah. When there's such an age difference between, I'm a 45-year-old man and when you go to visit a 90-year-old woman in the hospital, there's a huge difference, but the point is your presence makes a difference. Yeah. And so never underestimate the power of your presence and the power you don't have to have all the right words. You don't have to have everything down. Just go spend time with, people and get outside your office. In fact, I actually ran across that quote the other day is like, hey, your mission field is not in your office.
Yeah, that's right.
You can't expect your people to go out and invite people to church when the only place that they ever see you is at the office.
Yeah.
Get out in the community, be known. And, we're going to plug this because he's got the, I already told him I'm a little jealous of it. Like I'm about to try. I don't know what Henry County is going to do, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I community service is a big thing for me. And as a chaplain, I get to do a lot of fun things, but I tell you, that's a lesson that I've learned too, that there's a lot of power and presence. And one of the things that I find of great value is finding ways to serve outside of my position and more serve in my personhood in Christ. I think so often we get so caught up, or the trend is often that pastors get so caught up in pastoral ministry that there's a lot of you shoulds and not a lot of watch me. And I think there's some value in saying, like last year I talked to our congregation about, serving on post, serving at Fort Novacell. And so they had a picture that came up on their page. I'd already met with the chaplains. I was like, hey, what do you need from us? And they said, man, we need prayers, we need this and that. We just need people to come on post just the same as we're going off post. Mm-hmm. I said, great. Okay. Well, they posted a picture. They needed help for VBS volunteers.
Nice.
So I taught the Bible studies or taught missions for VBS at Fort Novacell last year. I'm doing something of that nature again this year. But I told my congregation, I was like, I'm taking the week to go and do this. And you need to know why. I said, this is both me serving on behalf of our church to support the community and as a believer in Jesus. Mm-hmm. Because I have asked you to do the same, and I'm not going to ask you to do something I'm not going to do.
That's right.
And I think there's some power in that. And I think there's power in leading by example in those ways.
Yeah.
I had a friend of mine who one time he said it this way. He said, it was a mentor actually. He said, he said, you cannot shepherd well if you don't smell like the sheep.
That's right.
And I think it's so impactful that we understand that in leadership. And one of the great ways to do that, and you know this, and I know that you've had to answer this question, taking this from practical to theological here, is through the sacraments, through baptism and communion. How do the sacraments play a role in your ministry at Headland and in your personal ministry as a believer in Jesus? How does that play a role for you?
On an everyday basis, I'm thinking about communion with Christ, not just in the spiritual sense. Wesley actually said, we should be as ministers, like partaking of communion. I mean, he believed in it like every day.
Yeah.
And, sometimes I don't understand his theological perspective on that, and then there's days that I do. A great example is yesterday. We had a confirmation sign up.
Yeah.
back in the fall, and I had a bunch of people that were like, "Oh yeah, well, I'm going to commit," and then fall season kicks in or whatever.
Sure.
So I had one confirmand, and somebody tried to talk me out of like, "Oh, you should put it off till the more kids are signed up." I was like, "Nope." We left Jesus leaves the 99 to find the one.
Mm-hmm.
And, but getting to walk through her confirmation story, and, she was baptized as a baby, and we did everything, possible yesterday just to make sure that everything was special for her. So even like remembering her baptism and her, first dipping her hands in the water, and we bought, water from the Jordan River, and like her cross was from Jerusalem. The oil was from an olive grove just outside of Jerusalem. Like, wow. I mean, these are all elements that don't exist here.
Yeah.
We brought them over, and for her to remember that, her life was already claimed by God. Like she was given a name, and she's already known, and she's been it's all prevenient grace and, sanctifying grace. And granted, she's young, 11 or 12 years old, and, not a lot of sin in front, behind her, still a whole life to live.
Right.
And so, but knowing that she has a relationship with God, and that she's known, and they're like, hey, these waters are not just a symbol. They are a sacrament.
Yeah. They're
holy. And you've been made holy not by the touching of the water, but what God has done through these waters. And then she got to lead the Apostles' Creed,
nice.
Things like that, I mean, so she, helped lead worship, and, and then she turned around and sang in the choir, this little 11, 12-year-old girl singing with all the adults, what I'm saying? And it's awesome. We had a special fit of robe too. It was hilarious.
Yeah.
So, but then communion, I explain it every Sunday, every time that we have communion, I talk about like, hey, this is not a check in the box moment.
Yeah. Right.
It's holiness. This is Jesus's command to his church. This is some of the last things that he did. He said, remember it. It's not just a remembrance, I mean, we, these Methodists don't believe, that he is the physical meal, but he's present somehow in the holy mystery that it is.
Right.
In other words, it's that good old Methodist saying, like, how many Methodists does it take to screw in a light bulb? We are neither for nor against the screwing of the light bulb. Right.
Yeah. Right. Uh-huh.
It's our way of saying, like, we're not sure.
Yeah.
But in that not sure is the grace of God. It's, so we take that moment serious, and we tell people, like, do not reach out and grab the communion. Just receive it.
Yeah.
Jesus, yes, he takes and breaks the bread and passes it, but he's giving it. He's, and then same thing with the cup and everything else. We want to treat that as a holy moment. And so for me, no, I don't have communion every day. I do think about it a lot though, like, where do I need to receive, and what do I need to receive from God today?
Yeah.
And, so, before I receive communion that morning, I treat that whole Holy Communion morning, just a little bit different than the normal Sunday.
I have seen the beauty of communion in a variety of ways. There are two moments in my ministry, in my life, that I remember distinctly. One was so our church does communion by intinction, and I think most do, but some Sundays, what we've done is, in our traditional service, because it's set up to do this, we have kneelers all across our chancel, and we invite the congregation to come, and they kneel, and then we'll give them a piece of bread and break it, the body of Christ broken for you, and an acolyte will give them a cup, blood of Christ shed for you. And just the symbolism of a believer coming down on their knees with their hands out, receiving the body of Christ and the blood of Christ. For me, the first time seeing that, and I grew up Baptist, so growing up with once a quarter, take these wafers and pass them down the aisle, and just to that, where it's a holy moment. We've just confessed our sin together. Mm-hmm. We've just read the gospel story, and now we are coming and getting on our hands and knees to receive the body and blood of Christ. Is just so transformative for me. But the second, I had visited a church member, and I had been visiting quite a bit. So she was a shut-in, and she had some reasons she could not come to church, and she hadn't taken communion in a year, 2 years, something like that. Maybe it been more. I don't remember which. But I showed up one day and I brought communion with me, and we blessed the elements there. And she said, "This is the first time I've taken communion." She just wept. I mean, just wept.
Yeah.
And it was so powerful to see both what it means to people, and to see how Christ just in that moment even just transformed her heart of where it was such a holy and special moment for her. And so I think sacramental theology is so crucial to our ministry and the life of our church.
Yeah.
Both in daily practice, a kind of tongue in cheek, an Asbury story. It was 2020. It was February of 2020. I had gone up for an intensive, and I was, Lord, off the top of my head, I forgot his name. I only had him for one class.
Which class?
It was inductive Bible study of the Old Testament law. He's an Anglican priest.
Yeah, and
yeah, I can't remember his name. I've got it in my notes, but anyways, we show up for class, and he said he starts off the class with communion. That's what we start the class off with, and he says we'll start off every class this way, and there will be we practiced the daily office, and that was really cool.
Yeah.
To see all of that. But I will tell you this, it really prepared me well for class. I studied better in that class. I tried harder in that class, mainly because my first inductive Bible study class was on the Gospel of Mark.
Oh.
My second inductive Bible study class was on the Old Testament. And so it was a significant increase in reading. Yeah. And so I was having to try hard to catch up. But one of the
bless you.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, one of the things was he for the sake of safety, down here at that point, COVID hadn't really been a major reality. This was February. I think we shut down like the end of March, 1st of April, something like that.
Yeah.
And he handed us the little single serve cups with the wafer on the top. And I looked at that little wafer and I said, I'm just looked around. I was waiting for somebody else to eat it first. Because I was like, this is styrofoam. I'm not about to put styrofoam in my mouth. And it prepared me well for COVID, because that's what we did for a solid year and a half.
Yeah.
And even more because we had ordered so much of this that we didn't want it to go bad. So that's kind of funny way of the sacraments, but it did make at-home communion a lot easier, because we could just, instead of pouring things in a little cup and all that, we just take a box.
Well, I've got two sacrament stories.
Okay.
Yeah. One of them is more emotional. They're both emotional. So COVID, and we're well into COVID, and I was serving two churches in the Mobile area, Satsuma and Whistler, in the city of Pritchard. And so Pritchard was my early service, and we had just gotten together and said, hey, we're going to order all one big thing from this company, and because I'd seen them at Christ United, is they had these little cups that look like chancels, or like the more chancel cups. So it actually looks like a physical cup. So juice on top, bread on the bottom. And it was a lot easier to open for some of the older folks than the ones
we had. A lot of folks that had problems with that.
And so it was a Lutheran company that we had to order from. And, so I'm at church, and, we had them all spread out, where people normally sat, because it was a smaller church, about, 30 folks. And, so my lay leader is this very large African-American man named John Johnson, and just big, 6'5", probably close to 400 pounds. And he put on a lot of hand sanitizer that morning. Like he was constantly putting on sanitizer. And so as we're going through, we go through the liturgy and everything else. And I said, hey, we're going to open it all together at the same time, do this at the same time. Because our normal practice was intention. And I said, and those who feel like you can kneel, hey, please just come up one at a time, when you get done, things like that. And so I see him putting the sanitizer on. He's sitting like, from me to the camera. So I think the thing that I'm smelling, we hold the body and then we peel the lid back. I think the thing that I'm smelling is the hand sanitizer. And the moment I say, and this is the blood of Christ, and it hits my lips, I was like, that's real alcohol. That's real alcohol. Oh, Lord Jesus. And which I know we're Methodist, and that's all I'm going to say is that we're Methodist.
I do have a friend of mine that, I'm not going to say who or his church or anything like that, but his church does communion with real wine.
Oh, yeah. Episcopal Church.
United Methodist Church.
Oh, okay. Very well.
United Methodist Church.
We will not out him.
Yeah.
And, so it hits my lips, and, I'm kind of waiting, but then one of the men gave me 2 claps and a Ric Flair. He's like, woo! He just lit up, and he was like, preacher brought the good stuff, And we had like a holy just roar for a moment. And I thought about that. It's like, but church this is good stuff every time.
Yeah.
His grace is good. This is, and we had about probably another 5 or 10 minutes worth of church at that point, and But I knew that my next church, I better warn them ahead of time and bring out some of the old Welch's stuff as they did not like real wine. And so, because we at that church, we had to celebrate recovery ministry and AA and things like that. So we had to be very cognizant of that. The other story is, and I've shared this with a lot of my churches, is when I grow up, I want to be Frank Healy.
Frank Healy.
He was a lay leader in Mexico Beach and Weewha Hitchka and our church in Honeyville, which is also in Weewha Hitchka. So, I mean, the guy literally was at 3 churches every week.
Listen, if you don't know what Weewha Hitchka is, it's Weewha.
Weewha.
Okay.
They know. You can look it up, Google it. Anyway, so they, so he was a lay leader and he was pretty much kind of he went and taught Bible studies at all these churches and attended. And Frank was an older man. He was like, I mean, again, a tower of a man. And he's 6 foot, but he was really 6'7" because he was hunched over. Yeah. And, but he had a really bad infection, pneumonia. And I get a phone call like, hey, Frank is not going to make it. And, he wasn't even mine, but the guy that he was his senior pastor was out of town. He was in Nashville. And the other pastor that was at Weewha was also gone. So I was like, yeah, I'll go. And that's not a problem. And he's requesting Holy Communion. And I said, oh, okay. So, took out my wife's grandfather's Holy Communion set, mixed it all up, made sure that it was not fermented, and, got it ready, got down there. At the same time, on the way there, I get a phone call that one of our young men from the church had fallen out of a tree and broken his back. Wow. So Frank is here and this young man is up here on that floor. So I come in and see Frank. He's wearing an oxygen mask, clearly struggling. And we lock eyes and I, he says, I said, I'm here to visit you. And there's another guy upstairs, and Frank kind of pulls off his mask and he says, well, what happened upstairs? And then explain it. He puts his hand on my hand. He said, preacher, this can wait and go upstairs. Mm-hmm. So I go upstairs, and got to pray with him while I literally walked with him as he's walking into surgery. Come back downstairs, and Frank, in that 7 or 8 minutes, had already started to slip.
Wow.
And so, me and his wife, we began to pray, and, I dipped the communion and placed it on his tongue so that he could receive communion, and minutes later, passes on.
Wow.
And so, but that moment impacted me so much because that was his last request, essentially, was the last meal I want is the sacraments.
Wow.
Not a steak dinner, not his favorite fast food.
Yeah.
I want the body of Christ.
That's awesome.
And so that, usually I can, especially if I preach it, I will get pretty emotional about it. And, but I think about that and I'm like, that is what that meal really represents and means to people. That's right. It is the body of Christ.
That's right. That's right. Well, and in our liturgy, we confess it in our liturgical prayer at the end of the sacrament, in the end of the liturgy before we serve. Let us be one with Christ, one with each other, and one in ministry to all the world. Make this bread and wine be for us the body and blood of Christ, as we are the body of Christ to the world. Mm-hmm. And may that be our prayer as we end today. Thank you all so much for joining the No Grow Go. Clayton, thank you. Thank you for being here. Yeah. May your coffee be strong. May Headland continue to be blessed. Thank you all so much.